Welcome to Psychology Ninjas. Our focus today is from learning theories and Bandura's 1963 study. This is a key piece of research, and so you're going to have to tackle it in the same detail as a classic or contemporary study. How does this break down into our explanation marks? Well, we're going to get our AO1 marks from key details of this study: the aim, procedure, findings and conclusions. It's really important here that you focus on specific, unique details from 1963. That's going to give you more marks than a big description about how it's exactly the same as 1961. We really want to focus on the aim, that this is to test whether a filmed role model would have the same effect as a live role model. Also, whether a cartooned role model or a realistic role model is going to have the most impact. Focusing in on the procedure, as we said, unique details. So we're now talking about 48 boys and 48 girls and an independent groups design. This means that the participants, the girls and the boys, were randomly allocated to either the live condition, the filmed condition, or the cartoon condition, or the control group. Have key details, as you can see here on screen, about what this involved. With findings, start broad and then get more specific. All the aggressive groups showed more displays of aggression than the controlled group. If you can top and tail this to start, with cartoon having the highest mean and control having the lowest mean, that's going to give you more marks. It's important to say here that although it was statistically significant between aggression and control, each of the variants of aggression were not statistically significant. Again, when we're thinking about conclusions, making sure they're specific to 1963 and film-mediated aggression is really important, rather than just talking generically about imitation and modelling. Okay, how are you going to evaluate? Well, this is a study and therefore we're focusing on grave. Each of these aspects breaks down into an explanation and then a counter-argument through elaboration. So we're wanting to think about framing each evaluation point to form mini conclusions throughout. This is what's going to access those higher order marks. If we're thinking about this evaluate question, we know we should be equal between our AO1 and our AO3 marks, and we also want to try and be balanced between our strengths and our weaknesses. By having our counter-arguments each time, we're enabling this to happen. We start by talking about our aim and our participants. Now, it's important here that when you get this question in the exam, it would have the full title of Bandura's study, so it's cueing you into the fact that this is film-mediated aggression. Here, when we're talking about participants, 48 is your key number and it's an independent groups design. Lots of our evaluation are going to be similar points to what we've already made or may make again with 61 and 65. However, you want to tailor these so they are specific to 63. So where we're talking about it being ethnocentric, well, that's going to have an impact on how much cultural exposure there is to TV or certainly cartoons. However, we can still conclude the fact that there's both genders and therefore this research isn't androcentric. Our mini conclusion here is that actually the generalisability for all acquired behaviours across all cultures is going to be limited. Moving through, we're talking about that procedure. And again, we want to focus on our description of each of those conditions and how those came about. This is a standardised procedure. Really important here is that regardless of what condition they were in, whether it was a cartoon black cat, a live aggressive role model or someone that was filmed, they're showing the same aggressive behaviours and therefore this isn't an extraneous variable. What isn't standardised is the way that the Bobo doll is reacting to the input given by each child. The fact that it comes back up is much more similar to a cartoon level of aggression rather than real aggression. And therefore that may explain why we see high medians of aggression in the cartoon condition. Overall though, still a high level of internal reliability for 1963. We then want to move through and give some findings, and our application here is about our application to the real world and the Sabido method. This is the inclusion of things that are topical or concerns in society in telenovelas in order to change and shape behaviour. We can also talk about 1963 having an impact on the watershed, and that most shows that have violence aren't shown until after 9 p.m. because of the concerns about children imitating those behaviours. All of this gives our study and its findings credibility. We're going to move through, and after talking about the conclusion, we're going to talk about internal validity. The inclusion of a control group means that we can account for some spontaneous aggression. However, There were significant participant differences because it was a random allocation, and we don't know whether those children who were most aggressive were actually put in the cartoon condition. Therefore, we've got a problem with external validity and accuracy of this outside the study. Finally, before we move into ethical issues, we can talk about the statistical significance of these findings. Here, we can talk about the same kind of ideas, but our change is happening in our elaborate. That actually displays of aggression within cartoons is typical of the real world, and the frustration that the participants were given were mild, short-lived, and also fairly like our real world. Here's our first exam question. So we need a bit more detail than just statements or a list. We need to focus in on the procedure, and this needs to be unique because it's specifying that this is 1963. We've got a command word, to what extent. This is asking us to explain and evaluate and give a judgment. You may want to start with how valid you think the 1963 study is in order to meet that requirement of forming a judgment. Thanks for listening today. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that bell.